The massive space station hung in the void like a crystal flower, its dozens of docking arms reaching out to embrace ships from across the galaxy. Inside Nexus Academy, the air hummed with translation devices working overtime as hundreds of young beings from different worlds try to understand each other for the first time. Hannah Kim stepped off the transport shuttle, her single bag slung over her shoulder. She was smaller than most of the other new students, barely reaching the chest of the towering insectoid beings that clicked past her in the corridor. Her black hair was tied back in a simple ponytail, and her dark eyes moved constantly, taking in every detail of her new surroundings. The other human students had been rejected by the selection committee months ago. Too aggressive, they said. Too unpredictable. Too dangerous. Earth was what the galaxy called a Deathworld, a planet so hostile that most species considered it uninhabitable. The fact that anything lived there at all was seen as either miraculous or deeply suspicious. Hannah had been chosen because she was quiet, because she scored high on intelligence tests and low on aggression metrics, because she seemed safe. The Academy officials had no idea how wrong they were about what made humans dangerous. In the Great Assembly Hall, Director Zilmoth welcomed the new students. His blue skin shimmered as he spoke, and his forearms gestured gracefully toward the gathered crowd. There were beings made of living crystal who sang instead of speaking. There were gaseous entities floating in containment fields. There were creatures with too many eyes, too many limbs, or no limbs at all. And then there was Hannah, sitting quietly in the back row, looking perfectly ordinary and completely out of place. "Students of Nexus Academy," the director announced, "you represent 47 different worlds and 33 different species. Here, you will learn not just from our instructors, but from each other." A ripple of excitement passed through the hall. Students turned to stare at their classmates, some with curiosity, others with barely concealed disgust. The predator species clustered together near the front, their natural confidence evident in how they took up space. The prey species huddled in groups, finding safety in numbers even here. When Director Zilmoth introduced Earth's representative, conversation stopped. Whispers filled the air in dozens of languages, but the translation devices made sure everyone understood the key words: Deathworld, primitive, violent. Near the front of the hall, a massive figure turned to look at Hannah. Dak was a Krovok, one of the galaxy's apex predator species. His black scales reflected the hall's lights like polished armor, and his golden eyes held the confidence of a being that had never met anything it couldn't kill. When he saw Hannah, his lips pulled back in what might have been amusement. "That's the Deathworlder?" he asked his companions, not bothering to lower his voice. "She looks like a juvenile. Are we sure Earth actually sent a student and not someone's pet?" His friends laughed, a sound like grinding stone. Other students nearby shifted uncomfortably, but none dared to speak up. The Krovok were known throughout the galaxy as natural leaders, beings who took what they wanted and faced no consequences, because nothing could stand against them. Hannah heard the laughter, but her expression didn't change. On Earth, she had learned that the loudest predators were usually the ones with something to prove. The truly dangerous ones didn't need to announce themselves. After the ceremony, students began filing out to find their dormitories. Hannah found herself walking behind a group of ethereals, gossamer-winged beings who floated rather than walked. Their voices were like wind chimes as they discussed their homeworld's peaceful crystal cities. No storms above Category 1. One of them was saying, "No dangerous animals. No unpredictable weather. My parents chose our settlement specifically for its safety ratings." Hannah listened to similar conversations as she walked. Garden worlds with controlled climates. Colony planets where technology had tamed nature centuries ago. Civilized places where the biggest danger was perhaps a minor equipment malfunction. None of them had ever lived on a world that tried to kill them every single day. In her assigned room, Hannah unpacked her few belongings. The space was designed to be adaptable for different species. The walls could adjust their color and temperature. The furniture could reshape itself. And the atmospheric controls could provide dozens of different breathing mixtures. But it felt cold and artificial compared to her small bedroom back on Earth, where she could hear rain on the roof and feel the building sway slightly in the wind. She pulled out a small pendant from her bag, a piece of black stone her grandfather had given her before she left. "Remember Hannah," he had said. On Earth we learn that the most dangerous animals are often the smallest ones. They survive not by being the strongest, but by being the smartest, the fastest, and the most prepared. Through her room's viewport, she could see the stars. Somewhere out there was Earth, spinning in its deadly orbit around a variable star, its surface scarred by earthquakes and hurricanes and ice ages. Most of the galaxy considered it a hell world, but to Hannah, it was simply home. Tomorrow, classes would begin. Tomorrow, she would start showing her classmates what it really meant to be human. And tomorrow, beings like Dak would learn that when you evolved on a world that spent for a billion years trying to kill your ancestors, you developed certain reflexes. Reflexes that could surprise even apex predators. 3 weeks had passed since Hannah arrived at Nexus Academy, and she had begun to understand why the other species looked at her with such confusion. What they found difficult, her body handled automatically. What they considered dangerous, she barely noticed. In the low-gravity training rooms, her classmates struggled to move properly. Their bodies, evolved on worlds with gentle conditions, couldn't adapt quickly to the changes. But Hannah moved like she had been born in space, her Earth-trained muscles adjusting without thought to whatever gravity the room provided. She sat in Professor Velnash's biology class between 2 students who had become her friends. Yuki was an ethereal whose transparent wings caught the light like soap bubbles. She spoke in whispers and jumped at sudden noises. Taro was young for his insectoid species, his shell still soft and pale green instead of the deep blue of adult Centauri. Both of them were fascinated and terrified by their human classmate in equal measure. Today we will discuss how different worlds shape the life that grows on them. Professor Velnash announced the class. His 4 eyes moved independently as he looked at each student. Miss Yuki, please tell us about your homeworld. Yuki's voice was barely audible as she described her world of floating crystal cities. The atmosphere was thin and sweet, filled with gases that let her people drift through the air like living clouds. Storms never came because the weather was controlled by ancient machines. The strongest wind was barely enough to move a leaf. Excellent, the professor nodded. And Taro, the young Centauri straightened proudly. Centauri Prime is a perfect world. Our machines keep the air exactly right, not too hot, not too cold. We have gentle rains that come exactly when our crops need them. The gravity never changes, and our cities are built to be completely safe. Other students nodded approvingly. This was how civilized beings lived, in harmony with technology that protected them from their environment. Very good. And Miss Hannah, would you describe Earth's conditions? Hannah thought carefully about her words. Earth has about the same air as many worlds, mostly nitrogen and oxygen. The gravity is a bit heavy by galactic standards. The weather varies. Varies how? The professor asked with interest. From the back of the classroom, Dak's deep voice cut through the air. Come on, Deathworlder. We've all heard stories about your savage planet. Don't be shy. Professor Velnash frowned. Mr. Dak, please let Miss Hannah speak. It's okay, Hannah said quietly. She looked around the room at the curious faces of her classmates. These beings had lived their entire lives in safety, protected by technology and careful planning. They had no idea what it meant to live on a world that didn't care whether you survived or not. Last month, before I came here, my city had what we call a thunderstorm, she began. The winds were moving at about 180 kilometers per hour. Lightning was hitting the ground every few seconds, each bolt carrying enough electricity to power this entire academy for a day. Ice chunks the size of my fist fell from the sky. The classroom became very quiet. Yuki's wings had stopped moving entirely. That's impossible, whispered a crystalline student from the front row. Nothing can survive winds that strong. Lightning of that power would kill any living thing it touched. We lost electricity for 6 hours. Hannah continued in the same calm voice. I helped my neighbor fix his roof and cooked dinner over candles. The news said it was a pretty normal storm for that time of year. Professor Velnash's 4 eyes were all focused on her now. Miss Hannah, you're describing what we would classify as a Category 9 disaster event. On most worlds, that would require complete evacuation to underground shelters. We just stayed inside and waited for it to pass, Hannah said with a small shrug. My grandfather always said that Earth doesn't make it easy to live there, so we have to prove every day that we deserve to stay. The silence in the room was complete now. Students stared at her like she was describing life on an alien world, which she realized she was. Dak leaned forward in his seat, his golden eyes narrowing. Your grandfather sounds like a primitive warrior. Tell me, little human, what happens when your people face a real predator? Something with claws and real strength. Hannah met his stare calmly. We adapt, Dak. We always adapt. Adaptation, Dak rumbled with amusement, is what prey does when it can't fight back. What happens when adaptation isn't enough? Then we survive anyway, Hannah replied. That's what humans do. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Taro's shell plates were clicking nervously, and Yuki had drifted up toward the ceiling, following her species' instinct to get away from potential conflict. Professor Velnash quickly moved the discussion to safer topics, but word of exchange spread to the academy like wildfire. Students began looking at Hannah differently, some with new respect, others with growing fear. That evening, Hannah found Yuki and Taro in the observation lounge, staring out at the stars. Is it true? Yuki asked in her whisper-soft voice. Do you really live through such violence every day? Hannah settled into a chair designed for beings much larger than herself. We don't think of it as violence. It's just normal. You get used to whatever you need to get used to. But how do you sleep? Taro asked, his mandibles clicking with confusion. How do you go outside? How do you live without being afraid all the time? Hannah considered the question. Maybe we are afraid, in a way, but fear isn't always bad. Fear keeps you awake. Fear keeps you alive. She smiled at her friends. And fear, used properly, can keep other people alive too. Neither of them understood what she meant by that last part, but they were beginning to realize that their quiet human friend was much more than she appeared to be. Across the academy, Dak was talking to his fellow Krovok students, his pride wounded by a small human who showed no fear of him. He was learning something that would prove dangerous. Deathworlders didn't recognize the concept of natural superiority, and that was something he intended to correct. The academy gymnasium was huge and strange, designed to work for dozens of different species. The gravity could be adjusted, the air could be changed, and the temperature could shift to keep everyone comfortable. Today it was set for what the teachers called mixed species exercise, a polite way of saying, try not to accidentally hurt each other while moving around. Instructor Jean Val watched her students with the nervous attention of someone whose species had evolved from herd animals. The ethereals floated through obstacle courses, leaving trails of sparkling dust behind them. The Zentori moved with careful precision, their insect-like limbs clicking in rhythm. Each species moved according to what their bodies had learned over millions of years of evolution. And then there was Hannah, who moved like flowing water. She navigated the obstacle course designed for beings twice her size without seeming to try. She didn't fight against the challenges. She flowed around them, under them, through them. The course that left other students exhausted barely made her breathing change. Remarkable, Jean Val murmured to her assistant. The Deathworlder makes it look effortless. What she didn't notice was Dak watching from across the gymnasium. For 3 weeks, the small human had refused to show him proper respect. She answered his challenges calmly, making him feel foolish. She excelled in classes where he struggled. Worse, other students had begun treating her with respect that should have belonged to him. His fellow Krovok students gathered around him, their black scales rippling with shared frustration. She moves like prey, pretending to be a predator. One hissed through sharp teeth. All that speed means nothing without real strength. Another added, flexing claws that could cut through metal. Dak watched as Hannah finished the course and walked to the rest area. She was alone. Her usual friends Yuki and Taro were still working on their own exercises. Perfect. On his home world, dominance was established through something called acclaiming, placing claws on another being's neck or shoulders to show superior position. It was barely more aggressive than a handshake among his people. The fact that most other species found it threatening only proved how weak they were. He approached silently, his footsteps making no sound on the gymnasium's soft flooring. His golden eyes focused on the spot where Hannah's neck met her shoulders, the traditional place for acclaiming. He would put his claws there, establish his dominance once and for all, and finally put the arrogant Deathworlder in her proper place. Instructor Jean Val was busy helping a struggling student understand momentum. Her attention was completely focused on explaining physics to a confused crystalline being. She never saw Dak moving across the gymnasium. Hannah was adjusting a water dispenser when her peripheral vision caught movement. 17 years on Earth had taught her body to react before her mind could process threats. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory. In a real fight, you won't have time to think. Your body must know what to do automatically. She sensed a large presence behind her, moving with predator stealth, reaching toward her neck with obvious intent. Every nerve in her body, honed by a lifetime on a world that killed the careless, screamed danger. Dak's claws were inches from her shoulders when Hannah moved. She spun faster than most beings could follow, her left hand catching his reaching arm, while her right struck his elbow with surgical precision. The movement was smooth, economical, devastating. She used his size against him, his forward momentum becoming the power for his own defeat. The throw was textbook perfect, a technique practiced thousands of times in her grandfather's dojo. On Earth, students performed such throws regularly without serious injury, but Dak wasn't human. His species had thick skin and dense bones designed for ground fighting, not for flying through the air. When Hannah released him, sending his considerable weight in a perfect arc across the gymnasium, he had no instinct for how to land safely. The sound when he hit echoed through the gymnasium like thunder. His armor-like scales, impressive against claws and teeth, cracked against the reinforced floor with sounds like breaking glass. He struck the far wall and collapsed, unconscious before his body finished sliding to the ground. The gymnasium went silent. Every being stopped moving to stare at the impossible sight. Dak, the apex predator, crumpled against the wall, while tiny Hannah stood where she started, looking down at her hands with what might have been surprise. Instructor Jean Val's prey instincts kicked in as she turned to see what had caused such a disturbance. Her eyes went wide as she saw Dak unconscious, Hannah standing alone, and every other student frozen in shock. "Medical emergency," she called, her voice cracking. Code 7 medical emergency. As emergency responders rushed in, Hannah moved calmly to where Dak lay. She knelt beside him and checked his pulse with the practiced skill of someone who had learned first aid on a world where help was often far away. "His heartbeat is strong," she reported to the arriving medical team. "Possible concussion, maybe broken ribs on the left side. He should recover completely." The lead medic stared at her with amazement. "You assessed his injuries?" "On Earth, if you hurt someone, you help them," Hannah said simply. "It's basic manners." As they loaded Dak onto a stretcher, Instructor Jean Val approached with shaking legs. "Miss Hannah, I need you to come with me. There will have to be reports." Hannah nodded and followed, not noticing how other students moved away as she passed. She had defended herself according to her training, helped an injured classmate according to her upbringing, and now she would face the consequences according to her sense of responsibility. It never occurred to her that she had just changed how every being in the academy viewed Deathworlders forever. Behind them, Yuki floated near the bloodstain on the wall where Dak had hit, her wings trembling. "Taro," she whispered, "remind me never to surprise Hannah from behind." Taro's shell plates clicked nervously. "Remind me never to surprise any human, ever." They were beginning to understand why Earth was called a death world. It wasn't just that the planet was dangerous. It was that everything the planet hadn't killed had learned to be dangerous in return. The hearing room at Nexus Academy had never seen a case like this one. Director Zilma sat at the curved table designed for different alien body types, reading reports on his datapad with careful attention. His blue skin seemed paler than usual as he reviewed the medical files and witness statements. Hannah sat to his right in a chair too big for her, wearing the simple dark clothes that humans considered formal wear. She looked calm and composed, though her hands rested carefully in her lap. To the director's left was an empty chair where Dak should have been sitting, but the Krovox student was still in the medical bay with cracked ribs and a concussion that fascinated the doctors. "Let me make sure I understand what happened," Director Zilmot began, his voice carefully controlled. Mr. Dak approached Miss Hannah from behind during a routine exercise period. "That's correct," confirmed Instructor Jean Val from the witness table. Her hand shook slightly as she spoke, her prey species instinct still triggered by the memory of sudden violence. "And Miss Hannah, you say you acted in self-defense?" "Yes, sir," Hannah replied quietly. "I detected a threat approaching from behind and responded according to my training." Legal advocate Morthek leaned forward with obvious doubt. His species had evolved multiple brains specifically for complex legal thinking, and right now all of them were working overtime. "Director, my client's injury suggests force far beyond what should be possible from a being of Miss Hannah's size. This wasn't defense. This was an attack by a violent primitive species." A wave of tension passed through the room. Hannah's expression didn't change, but something in her posture shifted, a subtle straightening that those familiar with humans might have recognized as dangerous. "Advocate Morthek," Director Zilmoth said carefully, "please stick to facts rather than species insults. The facts are clear. Mr. Dak is from the galaxy's apex predator species, while Miss Hannah comes from a world of lesser development. The difference in outcome suggests she used weapons or artificial enhancement." Director Zilmoth turned to the chief medical officer, whose multiple diagnostic sensors were currently inactive, but whose reputation for thoroughness was legendary. "Dr. Velkera, what did your medical examination show?" The doctor's artificial voice was clinically precise. Miss Hannah submitted to complete scanning immediately after the incident. No artificial enhancements detected. No weapons. All readings consistent with normal human baseline. A pause. However, several aspects of her physical structure are notable. "Explain." "Human bone density is 70% higher than galactic average. Muscle fibers show adaptation for explosive movement. Reaction time consistently in the top 1% of all measured species." Dr. Velkera's sensors focused on Hannah with scientific fascination. "Director, Miss Hannah appears to be exactly what she claims, an unenhanced human from Earth. And could such a being cause Mr. Dak's injuries?" Based on security footage analysis and Miss Hannah's physical capabilities, she showed remarkable restraint. Full calculations suggest her maximum combat potential could have caused significantly more damage. The room fell silent. Legal advocate Morthek's multiple brains were clearly struggling with this information. "Miss Hannah," Director Zilmoth said carefully, "help us understand your background. What training do you have?" "Standard Earth childhood education, sir. My grandfather taught me traditional fighting arts starting when I was 5. Normal curriculum includes emergency medicine, survival skills, and conflict resolution." "Normal curriculum?" Dr. Velkera's sensors turned toward her. "These skills are taught to all children?" "Yes, ma'am. Earth requires comprehensive preparation for daily life." Director Zilmoth activated the room's hologram display, showing security footage of the incident in slow motion. The assembled beings watched Dak approach from behind, claws extended toward Hannah's neck. Then an explosive moment of contact. Hannah's movement almost too fast to follow, the perfect execution of the throw, Dak's flight across the gymnasium. "Miss Hannah, when did you decide to use force?" Hannah considered carefully. "I didn't decide, sir. When I detected a potential threat approaching my neck with sharp objects, my defensive conditioning activated automatically." "Automatically?" "On Earth, thinking takes too long. If you wait to consciously decide how to respond to danger, you're usually dead." She gestured toward the frozen hologram. From first contact to resolution was 1.3 seconds. Human conscious decision-making takes about 2.1 seconds for complex situations. The implications settled over the room like cold water. These beings were beginning to understand they weren't dealing with excessive force. They were seeing the natural reflexes of a species that had learned to survive on a world where hesitation meant death. Legal advocate Morthek made one last attempt. "Regardless of instinct, my client was severely injured while attempting normal social interaction for his species dash." "Advocate," Director Zilmoth interrupted, "I have the complete legal brief on Krovok's social customs." New data appeared on the hologram. "The claiming ritual you mentioned is classified under Galactic Code 847, J as aggressive posturing. It's illegal when performed without consent on 847 different species, including humans." The weight of this revelation filled the room. Furthermore, Academy regulations specifically prohibit aggressive physical contact between students from different species without supervision and mutual agreement. His eyes fixed on the advocate. Your client violated Academy policy, galactic law, and basic common sense. The hearing ended quickly after that. No charges against Hannah. Dak would face discipline once he recovered, though the director suspected the young Krovak had already learned more than any formal punishment could teach. As the room emptied, Hannah remained seated, looking thoughtful. "Miss Hannah," Director Zilma said gently, "anything you'd like to add?" She looked up, and for a moment he saw past the calm competence to the young person underneath, someone far from home, trying to navigate a galaxy that didn't understand her people. "I hope Dak recovers fully," she said quietly, "and I hope he understands I never wanted to hurt him. On Earth, we say the strongest sword is one that never leaves its sheath." Director Zilmoth nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps it's time the galaxy learned about human philosophy along with human capabilities. As she left, Hannah passed students gathered in the corridor, Yuki, Taro, and others from her classes. They looked at her with expressions she was still learning to read, but she thought she saw understanding beginning to replace fear. The galaxy was learning its first real lesson about humans. They weren't violent because they were cruel. They were dangerous because they were trained, disciplined, and absolutely committed to protecting themselves and others when necessary. 2 months after the gymnasium incident, Nexus Academy felt like a different place. The changes were small but important, spreading through the student body like ripples in a pond. In Training Room 7, something that had never happened before in galactic history was taking place. A human was teaching aliens how to defend themselves. Hannah stood in front of 30 students from 15 different species. What had started as a simple conversation with Yuki and Taro about human defensive techniques had grown into the Academy's first cross-species self-defense course. Students who had once whispered about the dangerous Deathworlder now listened carefully to every word she said. "The most important thing to remember," Hannah said clearly, "is that size and strength mean nothing without respect and control." In the front row, Dak nodded seriously. The massive Krovak had returned to classes 3 weeks ago, his black scales bearing faint scars from hitting the gymnasium wall. But the real change in him was deeper. Where arrogance had once lived, something like wisdom had taken its place. Miss Hannah called Suji, a young ethereal whose wings shimmered with nervousness. "My people have no natural weapons. How could we possibly defend ourselves against real predators?" Hannah smiled, recognizing the fear behind the question. It was the same fear she had seen in human children when they first realized how dangerous the world could be. "Suji, please come forward," she said. "And Dak, would you help demonstrate?" The Krovak rose smoothly, his movements careful and controlled. The friendship between him and Hannah had become one of the Academy's most talked-about developments. The apex predator who now respected the small Deathworlder, not from fear, but from genuine understanding. "Dak will approach Suji exactly as he approached me in the gymnasium," Hannah explained. "Suji, remember that you don't need to hurt him. You only need to not be where he expects you to be." What followed was a careful demonstration of defensive movement. Suji, guided by Hannah's quiet instructions, learned to use her natural ability to float. When Dak's large form moved to where she had been, she was already somewhere else, drifting just out of his reach. "Beautiful," Hannah said as the demonstration ended. Suji used her natural gifts, stayed calm, and never put herself at risk. Defense isn't about becoming something you're not. It's about becoming the best version of what you already are. After class, Hannah walked through the Academy's garden area with Professor Velnash. The four-eyed instructor had become her mentor, helping her understand not just academics, but the complex social dynamics of teaching aliens. The director says applications to the Academy have increased by 300% since word spread about your teaching methods. Velnash mentioned studying the glowing flowers that bloomed in artificial twilight. Teaching methods? Hannah asked, genuinely confused. The combination of complete competence with complete restraint. The galaxy has never seen anything like it. He paused beside a fountain where crystal fish swam in impossible patterns. You defended yourself with devastating effectiveness, then immediately helped your attacker. You faced the tribunal with calm dignity, then use the aftermath to create something positive for everyone. Hannah thought about this. On Earth, we have an old concept called Bushido, the way of the warrior. It teaches that true strength is knowing when not to use your power. Yet you could have killed him, couldn't you? In that moment in the gymnasium, the question hung between them. Hannah was quiet for a long time. Yes, she said simply, but that would have solved nothing and taught nobody anything useful. Dak wasn't evil. He was just following his cultural programming. Once he understood that different species have different ideas about acceptable contact, he adapted. Professor Velnash nodded. The director is preparing a report for the Galactic Educational Council. He believes your presence here has proven that Deathworld species may have valuable perspectives to offer galactic civilization. Maybe, Hannah replied. Or maybe we just show that survival and civilization don't have to be opposites. Their conversation was interrupted by approaching voices. Yuki and Taro came toward them, along with several other students who had become regular participants in Hannah's classes. Behind them, moving with careful dignity, came Dak. Hannah, Taro's mandibles clicked with excitement. We have news. The Zentori Educational Ministry wants to start an exchange program with Earth. They want to learn more about human teaching methods. An ethereal council has approved cultural exchange protocols, Suji added, her wings pulsing with happy colors. They believe human defensive philosophy could help our species feel safer in the larger galaxy. Dak stepped forward, his golden eyes meeting Hannah's directly. The Krovak hegemony has also expressed interest. They believe that true apex predators should learn from those who survive without domination. Hannah looked around at the faces, alien, strange, but genuinely friendly, of her classmates. When she had left Earth, she had expected to be a curiosity at best, a feared outsider at worst. Instead, she had found something unexpected, the possibility of real friendship across species lines. That's wonderful, she said quietly. But remember, I'm just one human. Earth has billions of us, and we're all different. What you've learned from me is just one small part of what we are. Perhaps, Professor Velnash said with amusement, but if you represent human potential, the galaxy is about to become much more interesting. As the group walked back toward the main academy building, Hannah caught a reflection in one of the garden's mirrors. She looked the same, small, dark-haired, unremarkable by galactic standards. But she carried herself differently now, with the quiet confidence of someone who had found her place in a vast and strange universe. Behind her, Dak was carefully explaining proper warm-up techniques to a fascinated ethereal, while Taro demonstrated a defensive stance he had learned in class. The sight would have been impossible 6 months ago. Predator, prey, and everything in between, learning from each other with mutual respect. 6 months from now, when the first group of human teachers arrived at Nexus Academy, they would find a galaxy that had learned its first real lessons about Deathworld wisdom, that true strength was measured not by what you could destroy, but by what you chose to protect. And at the center of it all would be Hannah, the quiet girl from Earth who had shown the galaxy that sometimes the most revolutionary act was simply refusing to be anything other than exactly who you were meant to be.